Morning, it's breakfast on BBC Radio Leicester with Jim and Joe. Now, when you're prescribed a drug, somewhere in the package will be a little sheet of paper that lists the directions for use and the risks attached. But if we're honest, I know I certainly rarely read through them in any great detail. You kind of just trust that the fact that they've been prescribed to you is enough. But, if you weren't made aware of some serious risks in taking that medication, then beware is the message.
Well, Emma Friedmann was prescribed valproate to treat her epilepsy, but was unaware of the side effects that then changed her life and that of her son. Morning, Emma.
Good morning.
Morning. Let's go back to when you were pregnant and you were still dealing with your epilepsy, and I'm assuming you had the conversation with your doctor about how all this was going to work. What happened?
Yes, I saw my neurologist in about 1995. My son was born in 98, so I became pregnant in 98. But I saw a neurologist in about 95 and said that I was planning to have a family one day, that I'd heard something that valproate might not be good for use in pregnancy. And he was reassuring. He said, no, don't worry about it. What's important is your epilepsy is controlled, not an issue. I then went back in 1997 when I'd met Tim, my son's father. We were planning to have a family, and I thought, right, I'm going to go and ask the neurologist again. And he was very reassuring. He said, no, there's no problem with this drug. 2 to 3 times more likely for there to be something wrong, and it was a physical abnormality he was making reference to. So there's 2 to 3% risk in pregnancies that there would be some form of physical abnormality. So 2 to 3 times 2% is between 4 and 9%. So even it out, let's say there's a 7% risk of there being a physical abnormality. And, if you think about sort of like a cleft lip, that can be resolved, a missing limb, fused fingers or twisted toes, those kind of things can be easily resolvable.
So it was a risk worth taking, you felt at that time?
Yeah, it wasn't, I was reassured that everything would be fine.
Now, you were lucky enough to get pregnant sort of quite soon, and then was there any indication during your pregnancy perhaps of what was to come?
Well, I hadn't got any friends at the time who had children, or I hadn't any friends who'd recently become pregnant, so I hadn't known what a normal pregnancy was in observing it in somebody else or myself. Auntie didn't really move very much. So, I remember when my mum was pregnant with my sister, I remember putting my hand on her tummy and feeling my sister kick inside and, getting really excited as a 5-year-old, about that. And I didn't have any of that when I was pregnant. Auntie did not move.
And when he was born, what had emerged, and what was the situation as you gave birth and you were handed your little boy, and what was the problem?
Oh gosh, if only it had been as beautiful as that. I had preeclampsia and was induced 3 weeks before the due date. I had an epidural. My blood pressure was going up and down. I was coming in and out of consciousness. I was in what looked more like an operating theatre to give birth than the sort of like home birthing room that I'd wanted. I wanted to have a natural delivery. I didn't want any pain relief. And that just didn't happen. So epidural, there were about 10 people in the room when I had him. As soon as I gave birth to him, he was whisked away, resuscitated, taken away to the neonatal intensive care unit. I was stitched up, relaxed, my blood pressure settled. I went to see my baby a couple of hours later, and he was there. I mean, any parent who has had a child in NICU, the staff are wonderful, absolutely brilliant. But seeing your little baby there on a rack with intensive lights on top of them, keeping them warm, tubes in their feet and down their nose. It was a very, very emotional time.
And what problems emerged with Andy then subsequently?
Well, when he was born, he was floppy, he was jittery, and he needed to be resuscitated. I had wanted to breastfeed, but he didn't have the sucking reflex, so I just had to express milk. And that milk, he had to be, there was a tube put down his nose into his stomach, and so I had to measure out my expressed milk into a syringe and put it down the tube into, to feed him. And doing all of that through an incubator, while he's lying there in the incubator. I didn't hold him until he was 3 days old.
Oh. And how did you find out, though, that valproate might have caused some of the problems that he had?
I found out when he was about 3, because when a child is born, I'm sure it's probably the same now, when a child is born and they go into neonatal intensive care, you get assigned a paediatrician. So Andy had 6 monthly appointments at outpatients paediatrician with a paediatrician. The health visitor had noticed when he was about 9, by the time he was 9 months, that he just was not responding to me. He wasn't giving eye contact. He wasn't noticing when I walked out of the room. There was no call of his for my attention. Yes, he would cry if he wanted some food or, if he needed his nappy changing, but it was the paediatrician when he was about 2.5 that said, let's send him through for genetic testing.
Right.
So we had a genetics test. That was some blood taken from him.
And have you been able to, through this testing, have you been able to then get support as you look at the impact that this drug might have had on Andy's development? Have you met other families in a similar situation?
I haven't met any families of a similar age to me here in Leicester yet, but I am well connected with people all over the UK, Ireland, France, Belgium, Switzerland, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. There are families all over the world that have been affected by this, and I would like to say that the support that I've received here in Leicester, we've had physiotherapy at the Royal Infirmary, weekly outpatient appointments for a year. We've had speech and language therapy that they've come to my home, and they also in school. I've had fabulous services from the City Council, from the hospital, and from the community services.
But what would you like?
Been brilliant.
Good. And what would you like to happen next on an international platform, if you like, when you look at how your life has been affected, you say, by this drug?
Number one, women need to know what the risks are. I was told 7% risk of a physical malformation. And we look at the wonders that the para-athletics teams do, the Paralympics. That is possible for people with limb abnormality. And it doesn't have to be a disability, but it's this 40% risk of the neurodevelopmental birth defects. My son cannot make decisions for himself. He's 18. I can't come into the studio today because he's not feeling very well. Okay. But on an international level, women need to know what the risks are.
Right.
Regulators need to be proactive in their regulation. So if there's a suggestion that there's some kind of harm that can be caused, and bear in mind everything that we consume has some kind of risk.
Okay, Emma, thank you. That was Emma Friedmann. The drug manufacturer Sanofi has declined to comment about legal cases which are ongoing, but they have told the BBC that despite being an effective drug, valproate is only meant to be prescribed to women of childbearing age as a last resort. That's according to the UK's medicines watchdog. The advice is patients shouldn't stop taking medicines without consulting their doctor.